Okay, everybody, we're here at the NAS Oceana Air Show, and our first guest is the Carrier Air Wing Commander for Carrier Air Wing 3 that just got back from deployment aboard the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. So CAG, we've talked to two other folks from that deployment. We talked to the Strike Group Commander, Admiral Mark Miguez, at Hook a couple of weeks ago, where you and I first met.
Yep.
After we talked to the Strike Group Commander, we talked to the Commanding Officer of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, Pierside here in Norfolk, Captain Chowda Hill. So when I was talking to Chowda, I asked him, okay, what's the difference between what the Commanding Officer of the carrier does and what the Commander of the Air Wing does? But before you answer that, let's talk about your background. Where'd you go to college? What were some of the things you did along the way to becoming CAG?
So I graduated from Carnegie Mellon University in 2000, then went down getting ready for flight school. I had a little time and managed to sneak my way into dive school for a bit, for about 6 weeks down there in Panama City Beach. After getting winged, then went to VF 101 right here on the flight line, flew Tomcats. Finished up the FRS in 2004.
Okay.
And went to VF 103 right before the last deployment on board the USS John F. Kennedy.
Amazing. Tomcat channel at its core. We like to make a big deal out of our Tomcat Bubbas. You and I talked about this when we met.
There's
a few of you left. That's fantastic. Okay, so you transitioned to the Super Hornet after you guys turned in your Tomcats.
Yep, transitioned to Super Hornet, just became from VF 103 to VFA 103. Did another deployment on Ike back in 2006, 2007. Then went out to Fallon as an instructor at Top Gun for 3 years. Did my department head tour at VFA 31, just right down the road here.
There's the airplane right there?
Exactly. After that, did a tour at Naval Special Warfare Development Group, where I was a fleet liaison.
Hold it. That is SEAL Team 6. When you say DevGru, that really means SEAL Team 6 for the general public. So what the heck was that all about?
So I was a fleet liaison. My job was to kind of coordinate with the task force for the training and the ship that we were embarked upon. So I spent a lot of time talking to the captain, talking to the commander of the task force, and kind of just coordinating all the integration that needs to occur on board whatever ship we embarked.
So there will be some noise, but that's just the way it goes. We'll press on here.
That's right. Speak loudly.
We'll speak loudly and directly into our mics. What squadron were you a CO for?
VF 83, the Rampagers, just over there, the other end of the flight line, flying initially the F-18 Charlie. Then we transitioned after we deployed on the Truman to the F-18E.
We talked to Chowda about how you become a carrier commanding officer. We also made the point that people get confused that they thought he was running the whole war. If you followed him on Instagram, you may have thought that he was the kid doing everything out there. And they maybe didn't know the difference between what the Strike Group Commander does and what the commanding officer of the ship does. I also made the distinction that back in my day, the first two deployments I did, the Carrier Air Wing Commander worked for the Carrier CO. He was a post-Squadron Command 05, but he worked for the Carrier CO, which is kind of how it was since World War II times.
Right.
But during Secretary Lehman's era in the late 80s, he made CAG co-equal with the ship's CO. So now you are a warfare commander, just like Chowda is a warfare commander. You both report up to, in this case, Admiral Miguez as the Strike Group Commander. We just want to make sure that that's clear, as we pointed out with Chowda. So what was your training track? And when it came to that crossroads, let's call it, did you have a choice whether to go Carrier CO or Air Wing CO?
So they asked for your preferences. It's the same board that picks Carrier COs as the same board that picks Air Wing Commanders, and it's just done at a different timeline. So for Chowda's route, he screened probably shortly right after he finished his command tour, because there's a pretty extensive nuclear training pipeline that he does prior to showing up to his big XO tour. For me, post-CO, I was able to go do a year-long fellowship, and then was at the Pentagon for a couple of years, and screened for Air Wing Commander out of that. And then
where was your fellowship?
It was with SecNav Tours with Industries. I was in San Ramon, California, and I was working with GE.
Oh, okay.
So,
what was that like? Did that
it was
convince you to stay in the Navy?
Interesting. It was it was working with great people. It was a very different atmosphere. I'd never really worked in the civilian world since I left college, and it was neat to see kind of what that world had and what they were doing. And they, GE does a lot of great stuff for the military with their engines and things like that. And it was a nice exposure. But I was glad to get back in the cockpit eventually as Air Wing Commander.
So when you guys went on this most recent deployment, you were the deputy CAG, which you spent how many years in that role as the number 2 guy at the Air Wing?
A year and a half as deputy, and then a year and a half as the CAG.
So I've shown this footage a few times in various episodes of Admiral Miguez at the podium on the pier with your predecessor, Bomber McAllister, and Chowda, and I don't know who else is in the background. And Admiral Miguez is saying, nothing to see here, just a normal cruise. So I've asked each one of the previous guys in this, let's call it the Ike trilogy, you're the 3rd episode of the Ike trilogy. Did you feel ready once you got there for what you faced based on what you did during workups?
I absolutely felt ready. The Air Wing felt ready. I didn't know what to expect, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. We were going over there to kind of de-escalate after the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th. And as you know, shortly after getting underway, we were ordered directly into 5th Fleet. As we are transiting, the first kinetic actions kind of the Houthi attacks occurred with the USS Carney shooting down multiple one-way attack UAVs. And so we started to prepare for that. Primarily focused on a deterrence and presence mission, to prevent wider escalation in the region. But we were absolutely ready, I felt, for anything that we needed to see out there.
So both Admiral Miguez and Chowda have said that the drone part of the war was the one thing that perhaps you had to do some audibles while you were out there. Is that how you guys felt as well?
We absolutely needed to do a lot more planning and explore some tactics, techniques, procedures that we really hadn't focused on. But a lot of the building blocks that we built throughout the workup cycle definitely contributed to that. And then once we kind of optimized, our flight profiles and how we set up our radars and those types of things, we got exponentially better at it as time went along. So it was awesome to see that development occur.
So let's talk about the Air Wing side of the battles against the Houthis, starting with the planning cycle. So let's break that down into 2 different cycles. One is just cyclic ops,
right,
where something might happen, and you're kind of on an always alert posture, that missile in the air or drone inbound or whatever. And then the other is one of the 7 strikes that you guys did. I don't think the audience understands the, let's call it, tooth to tail of planning to operating. So in as far as you can tell us anything about that very classified process, how did that go? What's that all about?
So our primary job out there was to ensure freedom of navigation on the high seas, and that was in support of Operation Prosperity Guardian. So our focus was on defending ships. So the cyclic ops aspect of it on a day-to-day basis, we would fly when it was the best time to contribute to the defense of ships, whether that be our own destroyers and cruisers, or whether that be civilian merchants that maybe were escorting through the region, or that we're worried that the Houthis are going to cowardly attack. And so that was how we designed our day-to-day flight schedule, and that's how we executed it. And generally that resulted in about 80 to 100 sorties with aircraft configured both for the air-to-air mission in case one-way attack, unmanned aerial vehicles come out, as well as the air-to-surface mission in case we found something on the ground that was a threat to a ship, such as a launcher, an anti-ship cruise missile, an anti-ship ballistic missile. We would take it out in the relatively easy environment of it sitting on the ground. We'd blow it up with a bomb. And so we would fly that and be ready for that, as well as standing alerts all night long, which we launched.
What kind? Alert what? 15, 30?
It varied. It varied depending upon our location.
Okay.
But anywhere between alert 15s and alert 60s. And we launched those regularly at times. And to respond to either, like I said, swarm attacks from the Houthis, or to go strike something that we just discovered that we wanted to take off the chessboard right away.
So we got the Rhino Demo starting up behind us, just so the audience knows what is the noise they're hearing from different sources. Let's remind the viewers what squadrons you have in CAG-3?
So on deployment, we had VFA 83, the Rampagers, so my former squadron, which was pretty cool. VFA 105, VFA 32, the Swordsmen, or the Gypsies, as well as VFA 131 Wildcats. So those were our 4 FA-18 squadrons. And then we also had VAW 123, the Screwtops, our E2C Hawkeye 2000 squadron, as well as VAQ 130, the Zappers from Whidbey Island, flying the EA-18G Growler. And then we had our 2 helicopter squadrons, HSC-7, the Dusty Dogs, flying the MH-60 Sierra, as well as the Swamp Fox from HSM-74, flying the MH-60 Romeo.
So I asked Keds Converse, your colleague who we saw out on Truman a few months ago off the Jacks, in the Jacks Op area, what's the difference in his mind between the single-seat E model and the 2-seat F model of the Super Hornet, roles and missions-wise?
We kind of treated them on this deployment, given the mission sets that we had, pretty much the same. So an F-18E and an F-18F would often fly together or be interchangeable, and we would fly based upon what made sense from a scheduling perspective and who is ready perspective.
So did we have a generic loadout when we didn't know specifically what the threat would be? Am I manning a cap station? Again, unclassed, what would my mission look like during the course of any given cyclic cycle?
So we would generally, the F-18s, they would launch with, like I said, both air-to-air and air-to-surface loadout, carrying the AIM-9X Sidewinder, which was our primary missile against those UAVs, and as well as an AIM-120. And then we would also carry, depending upon the range and mission planning factors, 2 to 4 500-pound JDAMs, GPS-guided weapons, or laser-guided GPS-guided weapons to strike the targets on the ground.
So mission planning-wise, was there sort of a generic contingency brief that you would do? Again, this is different than if my target is this thing north of Sanaa, then I weaponeer it and I do that. But if I'm launching on one of these, we're not quite sure what could happen during the course of protecting shipping during Prosperity Guardian. How do I go through the contingencies day in and day out?
You brief to all of them, and whether that contingency is a drone comes out and we need to go shoot it down, or whether that's a small boat attack on one of the destroyers out there, or whether that's a strike either through a joint targeting message from the CAOC, or something that we discover while we're doing non-traditional ISR. You brief through all of those and are ready to kind of execute them on the fly, as depending upon what the enemy decides to do.
So out at Hook, we sat through a brief that you guys gave that my takeaway is the current configuration of a carrier strike group, particularly a carrier air wing as part of that, is well postured to deal with this asymmetric threat in perpetuity. And I asked particularly Admiral Miguez, how does this go sustainability-wise? Right now, TR just left, Lincoln's still there, Truman's about to go on deployment, probably goes straight to the Red Sea. Again, we don't know, ships can go anywhere. In your mind, is this something we can do forever until the Houthis finally give up, or what else has to be done?
Well, you're absolutely right on the point that ships can go anywhere, and that's really the beauty of the Carrier Strike Group. This mission that we did, ensuring the freedom of navigation, a righteous mission, the mission on which the Navy was founded. The reason why we're in the Constitution is to ensure the freedom of navigation, and we could park, and we did park, USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and the other ships in the Carrier Strike Group off the coast of Yemen to protect that freedom of navigation and degrade their ability to fight. And there's really no other entity in the world that can do that. And that's pretty cool to watch and pretty cool to see. So as far as in perpetuity or not, the Carrier is an awesome, sustainable platform. As you know, it doesn't require any gas to run around anymore. It just requires gas for the airplanes. And we have extensive logistics chains and supply officers and lots of people focused on making sure that the Carrier Strike Group has everything it needs to stay underway and be maintained. And it's a pretty awesome capability, especially when you're dealing with some contingency in some part of the world that maybe you hadn't expected and you don't really have any infrastructure there. That's where you send the Carrier, and that's why the President is always interested in where they are when crisis raises its head.
So when you get back, you and the other principals do the tour, as it were, after action briefs to centers of excellence like Top Gun, where you served as an instructor. What are you telling those guys about interdeployment training in terms of focus, right? I mean, we only have so many sorties we can fly. We got to focus on the peer threat, whether it's the NATO mission working in the Adriatic or 7th Fleet going against the PLAN or whatever else. Even, I guess, Iran starts to approach a peer threat in some ways. But you got to do that also balancing what was an asymmetric threat, significant and persistent in the form of the Houthis, which when you guys pulled away from the pier, you didn't really anticipate. So is the balance good now in terms of how we do interdeployment training? Do we need to tweak it? Is our weapons training appropriate in terms of anything from a BVR timeline to how we weaponeer a JDAM? How are we looking with respect to your experiences and what you're telling centers of excellence in the wake of that?
The training that we received at Air Wing Fallon was second to none. It was absolutely outstanding. And to answer your question is we tweak it all the time. I've spoken with the instructors there, with the folks that manage the syllabus. They've already incorporated changes into the Air Wing Fallon syllabus, into the Integrated Air and Defense Commander's course, those types of things from our lessons learned there in the Red Sea. And that happens after every deployment, whether you're fighting the Houthis or whether you're executing presence ops or whether you're executing freedom of navigation ops, whatever it is, that kind of communication between the fleet and the centers of excellence, both for naval aviation as well as the surface warfare community as well, is a very, very tight feedback loop. So we're always constantly improving it and tweaking it because there are a lot of mission sets that we need to be ready for, and some of them are much more challenging than others and take more time, and some of them we haven't even predicted yet, but the building blocks we always want to have prepared so we can go out and execute whatever our nation needs us to.
So what are you guys doing now? You got back, obviously, some liberty and some leave for folks, get refreshed, get reacquainted with the family, then what?
So we're in what's called maintenance phase, where you kind of focus mainly on training, mainly on grooming your aircraft, and then getting ready for the next time. Our E2 squadron, VAW 123, is going through a transition. They'll be switching platforms to the E2D, so a more advanced, more capable aircraft. We're excited for them to get their hands on. And then we're also changing some squadrons out with some other air wings, and you'll see a slightly different CAG-3 the next time she gets underway with the egg.
Any F-35Cs in the future?
Not in the near future.
Okay.
No, not for a little while.
So for you, if I'm doing the math correct, you have about another year left in the job?
That's correct, about 9 or 10 more months.
Okay, so. And then you're waiting for, see if you get selected for flag or not?
Trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
Okay.
So talking about next set of orders and those types of things. So to be determined.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Well, Starvin, Marvin, Scott, thank you for everything you did on this deployment, and thanks for spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for your service, sir.
All right. Tomcats forever.
That's right. Appreciate it. Cheers.
All right. That'll do it for our first episode from the NAS Oceana Air Show. Lots more to come, so stay tuned. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. And I look forward to talking to you again from the Air Show very soon.
Fly Navy.
All right.